Hey everyone, Dr. L here with week 2 video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. This week we're covering sociological perspective and theories. So in our virtual lecture, I'm going to do some housekeeping, some course introduction stuff where I navigate eLearn, which is sort of a continuation from week 1. And then I'm experimenting with what our virtual versus in-person classes will look like. But this week and probably throughout the rest of the semester, the virtual lectures will be more of a review from the previous week. And then the in-person lecture will be more focused on new content. And then I'll talk about some exit pass stuff, ending with reminders. As far as housekeeping, if you're having any issues accessing eLearn, our textbook, or anything else related to Sinclair and being a successful student, let me know as soon as possible. I'm actually going to be doing a tutorial on how to navigate our eLearn page in just a second, so hopefully that helps. But if you can't access things or you don't know where to find stuff, it's really going to make it difficult to be successful. So just make sure you're touching base with me on that. Submit your signed class agreement as soon as possible. Again, in the demonstration I'm about to do for our eLearn page, I will show you how to do that. And then you also have discussion 2 due by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. week 2, focusing on sociological theory and current events. And then if you have anything you'd like to share with your classmates, make sure you come prepared to do that in the housekeeping portion of our in-person lecture. So if you're, for example, involved with the student newspaper on campus and you wrote a really cool article and you want to share that with everyone else, this is your time to do that. Maybe you're involved with intramurals sports on campus and you want to recruit folks to do that with you. You could share whatever you want. And if you want me just to send something to the class email listserv, that's also fine. All right. I'm also going to be using these virtual lectures to go over some of the exit pass feedback that I'm getting. So I'll start with my Tuesday morning section. I didn't get a high response rate. Not very many students completed the exit pass for week 1. So make sure you're doing that. It really does help me adapt our class based off of student needs. And sometimes that's different for different groups of students. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. For example, in my other classes, a lot of students said that they're interested in nursing and healthcare professions. So now I know throughout the semester, as I'm providing examples, referring to the healthcare field is something that I can do to help make connections with what you all are interested in, thinking about those things from a sociological perspective. And then if you have questions I should know about, that's where the exit pass is handy. If I forget to address a question you asked, or maybe you forgot to ask something, you can always email me. You can ask me in the next week's exit pass, or you can ask me before or after class during our in-person sessions. My Wednesday class had a little bit better response rate. So one question came up about how to access the textbook. It's free online. I'm going to show you when I do the eLearn demonstration how to access that book. And then you can also buy a hard copy at the bookstore or anywhere you purchase online books. Make sure you follow the course schedule. Again, I'll show you where that document is located on our eLearn page in just a second. This will help you stay organized as far as keeping track of assignments and when they're due. And then as far as just like other sort of fun stuff in the exit pass, a lot of students said they're taking the class because it's required or it's a prerequisite. And that's totally fine. If you tell me what your major is or what your career aspirations are, I'll try and incorporate that into our class throughout the semester, similar to how I'm doing with the healthcare stuff. And then finally, someone made a comment that they had heard this class would be easy and that they hoped I didn't take offense to that. I don't. I think one of the reasons why people probably say that about sociology classes is because even though we do cover a lot of content and you have a lot of assignments due, we are focusing on how your everyday lived experiences and your unique worldview connects to the broader social world around you. And so that makes our content feel familiar. And you truly are experts on your own lived experiences. And so if you're able to incorporate that and connect it to class content, it should make you feel confident that you're taking a quote easy class. So I just wanted to address that. And then again, if you have any other questions, things I should know about, bring that up in the week 2 exit pass or before class on Wednesday evening. So if you're struggling to find things on eLearn, I'm going to show you how to do that. But before I do that, I also want to touch on, why do I create these videos? Well, first of all, our class is blended, which means it's supposed to be half in person, half online. If you think about a more traditional face-to-face class, typically face-to-face classes meet either 2 or 3 times a week in person for 2.5 hours. Our class meets once a week for 1 hour and 15 minutes, quite literally half the amount of time. So in order to make up that other hour and 15 minutes, I do these virtual lectures, which are usually about 30 minutes, give or take. And then the other 45 minutes comes from the online virtual assignments you're doing, like the discussion boards and stuff like that. The other reason why I make these videos weekly is because I'm responding to exit pass feedback. I'm adapting our course content in real time. So I know many of you choose to take blended classes because you're working full time, you have family commitments, you're taking a bunch of other classes, and you have this desire to work ahead. And I respect that, and I will allow you to access discussion boards and other course content on our eLearn page in advance. But because I'm responding to what's happening in our class in real time in these virtual lectures and in these PowerPoints, usually I'm going to make them on Thursday or Friday, and then they will be due the following week. So for example, this video right now, I'm making on Friday, week 1. And you are responsible for watching it week 2. So not a quick turnaround, but it is because I'm adapting to our class in real time. So hopefully that sort of makes sense as far as, like, if you're wondering, why can I access the virtual lectures and PowerPoints earlier? That's why. But without further ado, I'm going to go to our eLearn page. So if you go to my.sinclair.edu and you use your Sinclair login credentials, you'll get to this page. You'll go to eLearn. And then all of your classes will be here. Obviously, mine are all intro classes, but you should see all the classes you're enrolled in. Here is my Tuesday morning class. I'm going to quickly go to impersonating a student demo here. If I click on content, I should see everything that you see, how you see it. And so you'll see, for example, there's 4 weeks worth of content available. I don't give you all 16 weeks at once because that can be very overwhelming, but I will allow you to work a couple of weeks in advance if you do have a lot on your plate. So you can start looking at course content early, completing the discussions and stuff like that early. So just FYI. All right, so if you're a little behind and you haven't taken the course overview quiz or the department pre-assessment yet, that's where you can find these things. Our textbook, if you click on this link here, this is the free online textbook website where you can access the full textbook as well as the audio version of that book. It also has details about the textbook if you want to purchase it. Important documents. Here's our syllabus. Here is our course schedule. Here's where you submit the signed class agreement. So go to assignment, add a file, search your computer to find where you have the signed class agreement. Remember, that's the last page of the syllabus. And so you'll sign it, either type your name and upload it that way, or you can print it, sign a hard copy, take a picture of your signature and upload it that way. I don't care how you do it as long as your signed class agreement isn't uploaded blank, right? And that's just to ensure that we all understand that we're operating under the same set of rules and responsibilities, and you know what the expectations are in the class. And then once you've uploaded that file, don't forget to click submit. All right. The PowerPoints will all be here, both the virtual and in-person PowerPoints. So you can see the week 1 PowerPoint is here. It's actually the same for the virtual and in-person sessions for week 1, but it won't be moving forward. Week 1 video is here. This video will be here once it's finished. Then if you go to week 1, and you click down, you'll see there's a checklist here, which is handy dandy to make sure that you're doing everything you're supposed to. And toward the bottom is where you'll find the links to access the discussion board and any other type of assignments, like the department pre-assessment quiz. And the same is true for week 2. So here's the checklist, and then you go through all the different things. And if you go to the bottom, you'll see that the discussion is here. If you have not completed the course overview survey, you will not see these things. You will not see weeks 1 through 4. You can't access course content in blended or online classes without completing that quiz and earning 100%. The good news is you can take it as many times as you need to in order to earn 100%. And it's worth the time and effort because you will earn points toward your end of semester grade for completing that quiz and getting 100%. Okay, so now let's go to, wait, I need to exit out of this. And I'm going to go to my Wednesday evening class. So one thing I want to point out, if I go into student view, it should look similar, but notice weeks 1 through 4 aren't here. This is what your eLearn page will look like if you have not completed the course overview survey and earned 100%. You will have access to some of the content that you need to get started, but you won't have access to the weekly content, including the assignments. So make sure you've done that. Now, just to prove that everything is in good shape in my Wednesday evening blended class, I'm going to go into impersonating the student demo. I know in my Wednesday evening class, there were some issues with important documents. So I had accidentally put the syllabus for my Tuesday blended class up, I think maybe. So you can see here, this is the correct syllabus, your course schedules here. And because I've taken the course overview survey in this demo mode and earned 100%, weeks 1 through 4 are now available, okay? So you can see I don't have control over that. It's just based off of whether or not you've taken that quiz and earned 100%, whether or not that content becomes available to you. And so here you can see, well, I guess this is week 2. So you can see if you go here like this, the assignments that are due for this week are available to you, okay? And you have the checklist just like the Tuesday morning class does. And so eventually I'll keep adding weeks. So here soon I'll add weeks 5 and then week 6 and so forth. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of what our eLearn page looks like. And again, if you have any follow-up questions, come to my virtual office hours, in-person office hours, or schedule a time to meet with me if that doesn't work for you. Okay, now in terms of week 1 review, remember we talked a lot about foundational theory. So if you remember nothing else from this class after you've taken your final exam and gotten your end of semester grade from the registrar's office, remember Weber, Marx, Durkheim, symbolic interactionism, conflict theory, and structural functionalism. So thinking about okay, how do bureaucracies operate in these large-scale societies as industrialization is underway? Conflict theory, again, focusing on industrialization, but more so looking at how are the people working in these factories being exploited for their labor, and how can we make their experiences better by implementing policies such as an 8-hour workday or child labor laws. And then finally, structural functionalism, once again, looking at rapid changes to society due to industrialization, but focusing on what do our bonds and traditions look like when these changes occur very rapidly, and do things fall apart? Do we end up in chaos, or like what's happening there? So just remember these 3 theorists and their theories. And actually, when you read chapters 1 and 2 of our textbook, they will cover these theory and theorists in greater detail. And they will also talk about some other important theorists that contributed to the field of sociology. So there's a nice little timeline and little blurbs about a bunch of different people. Make sure you know them. Those are the types of questions I like to ask on quizzes and exams and stuff like that. So, one important theorist that's a more contemporary sociological theorist is C. Wright Mills and his theory of the sociological imagination, which you essentially have to use in every discussion post that you do. So make sure when you're reading about the different theories and theorists in chapters 1 and 2 of your textbook, you really focus on C. Wright Mills and the sociological imagination. Now, at the beginning of my courses, I always like to start off with foundational concepts that are important to me. These are my own takes on these key terms. You will find the majority of these key terms in our textbook with slightly different definitions. I do that intentionally because sometimes I don't like the exact wording that textbook authors will use, or I think they don't introduce a particular foundational term early enough. It also shows you how you can take a key term from your textbook and put it into your own words. I know sometimes that's a struggle for students. They want to regurgitate and do direct quotes from the textbook, but you can say the same thing in a slightly different way and still make reference to textbook terms in your own words. And that's what I've done here. So a social institution is a social structure or mechanism that organizes our everyday lives. These are sort of the big things that we can't really change as individuals, but are nonetheless important to our social world. Now, one of my pet peeves with a lot of sociologists is they tend to not define this term. They tend to just provide examples, which is fine, but you should be able to do both. So some good examples are family, education, politics, religion. Now, sometimes people will say, well, some of these things don't apply to me and don't organize my life. For example, religion. If you're not a religious person and you weren't raised in a religious family, you might say, well, religion doesn't organize my life. But if we think about the days of the week you're most likely to work, the days of the week you're most likely to take class, especially if, back in the day when you were a K through 12 student, it's based off of the Judeo-Christian calendar, right? Monday through Friday. We have Saturday and Sunday off because those are the most common Sabbath days for religious folks in the United States. So religion still organizes your life in some way, shape, and form, even if you are not personally a religious person. And that's true of things like education. Okay, you're no longer a student, you've graduated, you've got your degree and you've moved on, but there's ways in which education continues to influence and organize your life. It impacts the type of job you're able to get and the amount of money you're able to make and things like that. Intersectionality is the interconnectedness of systems of oppression, looking at race, class, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, ableism, sizeism, and other aspects of identities to answer questions about how these forms of privilege and oppression overlap and intersect. And last week in our in-person session, we talked about how it can be easiest to think about intersectionality in terms of micro scale stuff and how these things influence our everyday lived experiences. But we can also think about how these things impact bigger things, macro scale things like social institutions. So if we use gender and education as examples, the type of major you choose, and therefore the type of career you're most likely to have when you graduate, is very much based off of or influenced, by gender. And so we know that there are feminized professions and there are masculine professions. Nursing historically tends to have more women. STEM fields historically tends to have more men. And while there have been a lot of efforts made to change that up, a lot of money, grant money has actually gone into getting girls and women involved in STEM fields. We know that there are still very gendered ways in which education plays out in our society. And then the last 3 bullet points are different ways we can analyze the social world around us. So structure and agency. Do we actually have choices? Well, we like to think that every choice under the sun is available to us, but actually based off of social structures, we're very limited. If we think about something like the clothes we wear, we actually can't go into a store and pick out just any old clothes. First of all, stores tend to be organized based off of gender, right? So boys and girls section, men's and women's sections, and so forth. Now, we have gotten a little bit away from that. There is an increase in gender neutral clothing lines and things like that. However, things like socioeconomic status, your social class, matter when it comes to the types of clothes you have access to and the choices that are available to you, right? Because we know that if you are kind of not so wealthy, you're not going to shop designer brands, right? And unless maybe you go to TJ Maxx and get that sale. But maybe you're going to shop at Target and places like that, right? So what you're able to afford is based off of your social class. And so we actually have less agency than we think because of the structural forces at play in the social world around us. I've already touched on this a little bit, but we can think about macro versus micro scales of analysis. Are we thinking about the social world on a smaller micro scale, thinking about our everyday lived experiences, or are we thinking more about the macro scale and those large social institutions? Both are good things to do in sociology classes. It's just important that you're able to distinguish what type of analysis you're looking at. And then finally, I want to touch on material and culture again. So we'll actually learn the textbook definition of culture in our in-person lecture this coming week, week 2. But I think most people have an understanding that there are material cultural aspects of our society. For example, the stool I'm sitting on and the table that my computer is on, we all sort of know that that's a chair and you're supposed to sit on it. And that's a table, you're supposed to eat on it or do work on it, right? But we could assign other cultural meanings to those things. For example, you'll notice when I'm lecturing in person, I often will sit on the desk that's in front of the classroom by the podium. That's just something I naturally do. It's not supposed to be sat on. We all know that, but I still do it. So thinking about the material cultural aspects of our society can be a little more intuitive, but there are also non-material aspects of culture. So things like music and language, they still make up the very fabric of our cultural experience, but they're not physical things that you can touch and feel. And so that's an important distinction in the world of sociology. And then finally, systemic. This is fundamental and deeply rooted into our social structures and into the very social fabric of our everyday lives. Often when we hear the word systemic, we're talking about systemic racism and sexism and other isms. If we go back to the example of education and gender that I mentioned on the previous slide, we can start to think about the fact that, okay, the majority of the majors that are coded to be feminine and then the connected fields, career fields, they tend to earn less money compared to majors and career fields that are coded masculine, right? Like teachers and nurses. They make okay money, but maybe they don't make as good of money as STEM folks, people who are doing coding and IT work and doctors and lawyers and these different types of degrees and professions that have historically been coded as masculine. So that would be structural systemic sexism when it comes to education. Another important thing to think about when we're studying society is how do we categorize different societies? And so there's two main ways, individualism and collectivism. So in individualistic societies, the focus is on the individual person. This is pretty standard and typical of Western societies like us in the United States. And then collectivist societies focus more on the community. So not how can I better myself, but how is my contribution to the community having a positive impact. And so that's a really important distinction. Now with globalization and the increased connections we might have with people from other parts of the world, people from other countries and things like that, these two things are more and more blended. But it still very much influences and changes how the social world around us looks based off of if we historically, our country is individualistic versus collectivist. And what I mean by collectivist in Eastern countries are places like Japan, South Korea, China, where the focus tends to be more on the community rather than the individual. And then finally, neoliberalism. This is the commodification of social institutions and social processes. I'll say systemic and neoliberalism, the reason why I started including them as foundational concepts in intro classes is because they are concepts that are integral to the field of sociology that often get thrown around in a lay audience, especially in social media spaces, but they're often not defined. And so I want you to be able to know how to define systemic racism or systemic sexism or neoliberalism. If you're reading a clickbait article or your auntie is getting into a fight with your best friend on your Facebook or Instagram page, right? That's one of the reasons why I do this. But a good example of neoliberalism is, again, thinking about education as a social institution, and that gender example I gave, or I've been using multiple times now. By the way, I tend to use education as an example for social institutions quite a bit because we're all connected to Sinclair as a educational place in some way, shape, or form, right? So it used to be back in the day, as students like to use that phrase a lot, that when you went to college, you were studying for the sake of learning. That was the key thing. But as neoliberalism has started to play out in education has become commodified, especially higher education. It's less about learning for the sake of learning, and more the focus is on tuition dollars, so money being spent, as well as the money that you potentially will make when you leave here because you've gotten your degree and you have more career opportunities available to you. So if you think, for example, of the process you go through when you register for classes, you go to the list of all the classes and you explore the different options, and then you put the classes you want to take for the upcoming semester in your shopping cart. And then you check out and you have to figure out your financial aid in order to pay for those classes, right? It literally mimics the online shopping process. And so that's what we mean when we were talking about the commodification of social institutions and what neoliberalism looks like in social institutions. And so some examples of other social institutions and things that tend to be neoliberalized, religion and feminism are some other ones as well. Okay. Like I said, the exit passes are really important. There's a link for the Tuesday class. There's a link for the Wednesday class. These will be the same links on the PowerPoint for our in-person lecture. And I will also email them out to you later on in the week. As far as reminders, read chapter 2 or finish reading chapter 2, start chapter 3, submit your signed class agreement. Everyone should know how to do that. I have demonstrated how to do that in our in-person lecture from week 1 and our virtual video right now. Discussion 2 is due by week 2, Sunday at 11:59 p.m., focusing on sociological theory and current events. And then hopefully you still have some time to enjoy the rest of your week. That's all I have for you. I will see you in person either Tuesday morning at 9:30 or Wednesday evening at 5:30. Bye, everyone.